Good evening, I'm Raul Castro with the City of Hartford, Office of Emergency Management. Today we're going to be discussing the Severe Winter Storm Emergency Operations Plan for the City of Hartford, Connecticut. Now, there's a lot that goes into this topic. We're going to be discussing objectives and purpose for this, the role of city officials and the agencies that play a role in a winter snowstorm, the community and their whole involvement in this, their role in it, and where they fall into the planning process. Risk assessment and lessons learned from previous winter storms. Also discuss some of the identified hazards and risks. And from there, we're going to also cover city resources and capabilities that are available at this time and that will be procured as time moves on as well. Also discuss some concerns and restraints to the budget that we may face, as well as implementing the plan. And along with that, plan implementation amongst city leaders, the city itself, and then trial and maintenance for this plan. Now, the biggest thing is, the whole purpose of this plan is to inform the public of the city's emergency operations plans, which many may not be familiar with. Now, this involves the stakeholders, city officials, residents, anyone you can imagine that has a direct involvement with this. Now, of course, this plan is going to be detailed and comprehensive, and it targets to improve areas of weakness that have been identified for the city. Now, overall, the biggest thing that we're looking for to do is to protect life and property and build, most importantly, upon past mistakes and improve for the future. Now, this is ensuring city readiness and preparedness, addressing public needs, most importantly, and preserving and restoring city infrastructure to the best of our ability. Now, this also includes adequate emergency services and DPW response, and avoiding reminiscence of another winter storm Alfred like we saw in 2011. Now, starting with city officials, the mayor of the city of Hartford, Luke Bronin, is the chief elected official, and he is the one that has the role of putting into effect an emergency operations plan at any time. Along with that, the fire chief for the Hartford Fire Department, Chief Reginald Freeman, he is also the emergency management director for the city of Hartford. And he plays a major role in developing this EOP and making sure he's getting feedback from everyone involved to putting the plan into place and building an effective plan. Now we have Molly D. Rosado, who is the city council president for the city of Hartford, and pretty much the second in command, you could say, to the mayor of the city. Now, also, at the urging of the city council and city council president, an emergency operations plan can be put into place. If the mayor doesn't feel it's appropriate, the city council can overrule and suggest that he do put the plan into place. Now, taking the lead in a severe winter storm would be City of Hartford's Department of Public Works, which is directed by Walter Veselka. And pretty much from there, they will take the lead on this operation, since winter snow removal has three phases consisting of the pre-treatment prior to a storm, the snow removal during a storm, as well as the snow removal after a storm. Following that, we have Liani Arroyo, who is the Health and Human Services Director for the City of Hartford. Their role pretty much comes in regards to shelters, since you get people from all over the city coming into the warming shelters that will be open. They play a major role in sanitation for the shelters, providing food and entertainment for people while at the shelters, as well as other basic necessities. And along with that, Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, from the Superintendent of Public Schools for the City of Hartford, also plays a role in this, since one of the third shelters that we have available are schools. The first two are two senior centers, one located in the south end of the city and one in the north end of the city. And if those become overwhelmed, there is a third shelter that is taken on, and that is where the Superintendent of Public Schools comes in to accommodating that. We also have the interim police chief, Jason Thody, for the Hartford Police Department, who will be who is involved in this throughout the emergency operations plan and ensuring the police officers are doing their part during the winter storm and getting people to the shelters, as they are known for providing transportation to homeless residents of the community, as well as people who don't have means to get to the shelter themselves. And lastly, we have Jolita Lazouskas, who is the Director of Budget Management, Grants, and Revenue Services for the City of Hartford, and pretty much their role comes into observing the budget for the city, ensuring that overtime is being paid, the cost of pretty much the response for this incident, so getting the vehicles fueled, vehicles repaired, acquiring any additional resources that we may need last minute. Now, city agencies, some of them have been mentioned already, but these are city agencies that will be directly involved with a winter snowstorm. You see, we got the top three right here, which would be the Hartford Department of Public Works, as I mentioned before, would be taking the lead on this, as they play the major role in the before, during, and after of a severe winter storm. Followed by that would be Hartford Fire Department, which would be not only serving as the city's fire suppression services, but also serves as EMS and responds to many EMS calls around the city, as they tend to respond a bit faster than the ambulances do for the city. Then on top of that, we have the Hartford Police Department, who would be carrying on basic law enforcement duties as well as additional duties and responsibilities, such as transporting residents to warming shelters if they have no other way of getting there, or of a special needs population or homeless population. Hartford Health and Human Services has a role, as mentioned before, of sanitation, well-being of people in the shelters, as well as the well-being of special needs population, of people, who are confined to their homes, who are bedridden, and have to stay at home and don't have the luxury of being able to come to the shelters. They are also being taken care of by city's Health and Human Services. Hartford Public Schools, like I said, they oversee the additional buildings. There is a third building that is provided by Hartford Public Schools if the need arises and the first two warming shelters become overwhelmed. And if necessary, it could be accommodated where even a fourth, fifth, and sixth warming shelter could be provided courtesy of Hartford Public Schools. Budget Management Service, Revenue, and Grants Manager. They handle, as mentioned before, the finances for the city, finances for the response, pretty much employees overtime. So the fire department, DPW, police, they're going to have their normal personnel working, and as well as additional personnel on top of that to supplement and be able to adequately respond to this incident. Therefore, that's where budget comes in, to ensure that there are funds to pay for those additional resources and personnel, as well as ensuring that additional equipment needed to adequately respond to this scenario, or to this incident, will be allocated for the city ahead of time, and if necessary, during the response. And also, along with that come city designated contractors that will take on a supplemental role to assist DPW if they become overwhelmed. Now, the biggest thing with this plan is the pledge to the community. So, the Office of Emergency Management for the City of Hartford pledges to its residents to work around the clock to ensure that a severe winter storm will not have a heavy impact on them, and more so to effectively prevent, mitigate, and respond to the risks associated with this kind of event. This will be done in order to ensure a continuity of city operations and business as usual for the city's 125,000 residents, and that there is no gap in emergency services or special population services. Now, what that means is the community is a big part of this. Who doesn't want to be included in how their community is run, how things that directly affect them, they're not consulted about. So the biggest thing would be whole community involvement for getting an emergency operations plan developed. Now, the community will be an integral part of the emergency operations preparation, and as well as adjusting it to meet everyone's needs. Now, the community's needs should be the first thing that is identified and addressed when discussing this plan, because they are the majority stakeholders, in a sense, of everything that goes on in the city, and they're the ones impacted the most when the city has to shut down because of a severe winter storm. Now, their whole community involvement the whole community involvement is best achieved through town hall meetings, community surveys, and involvement in community events from our elected officials, such as councilmen, selectmen from the community, as well as members of the fire department, police department, where citizens can address concerns, can address issues of winter storms, or what they are impacted most, and they can be discussed by the emergency operations planners and put into the plan. Now, open forums with the community leaders and elected officials is the primary and preferential method to accomplish this. Now, taking all that into account, having talked to the people and researching, seeing what there is, the biggest thing we've found is risk assessment to make this plan happen. Now, for this plan, an extensive risk assessment was conducted, primarily looking on past events such as Winter Storm Alfred or the 2011 Halloween nor'easter, as some might remember it. This was a storm that took the state completely by surprise. Overall, needless to say, we were unprepared for not just the city of Hartford, but the state of Connecticut as a whole, and did leave many communities essentially, literally, in the dark for an extended period of time. Now, this was an eye-opener, not just for the city of Hartford, but the whole state of Connecticut and the whole region altogether. The biggest issue was a loss of power and then restoration of power to residents throughout the state. The city of Hartford was fortunate, since it was a city. It has a larger power grid and is available to have power restored in a faster amount of time than some of the suburban communities of Connecticut. Most parts of Hartford went without power for approximately 3 or 4 days before power was essentially restored, but other areas of the state did suffer a bit longer. With that, there was issues of loss of life, which is a big thing that comes from it. That was seen during Winter Storm Alfred. There were some fatalities resulting from people with loss of power or operating generators improperly within their homes or in an enclosed space. And on top of that, as you can see in some of the images provided, there was extensive damage as the snowfall came very early and out of season. Many trees were not ready for the weight of the snow, and in turn would collapse, knock down power lines, and cause blockages of roads, making it almost impassable for first responders, DPW vehicles to be able to effectively clear the area, and did in a sense cause a delay and lower the infrastructure for the city. Now, with that, it's safe to say that these lessons were taken and they were improved to identify some hazards that still exist despite what we have learned in the time that has come. Obviously, Hartford is a diverse population consisting of about 125,000 residents, 45% being Hispanic, 36% African American, and 13% white or Caucasian. And on top of that, you have special needs populations for very different needs that our community needs to support. And in total, the city receives about 200,000 calls annually for service from either police, EMS, or fire department. Now, during a storm like this, those calls still come in. Those don't stop just because the snow has come and has crippled, in a sense, the infrastructure of the city. Those calls still come in, and first responders and other emergency services still need to respond adequately and quickly to these calls. Of course, this will pose to be a problem when things such as roads are blocked off or the city is overwhelmed with large snowfall and they cannot adequately and quickly remove snow. As mentioned before, this was the case in Winter Storm Alfred. Many roads, even main roads, which are usually priority for DPW, were not able to be plowed in an adequate amount of time because vehicles were not equipped with snow plows yet, as it was not anticipated that there would be that much snowfall, and snowfall usually doesn't come that early in the season. Of course, since then, it has been implemented to have plows more readily available and able to be more quickly installed on vehicles, to have vehicles from DPW rapidly deployed and on the go. With that, as mentioned before, many main roads were not plowed, and side roads were less taken care of, which caused a delay in service. Oftentimes, many firefighters would have to respond to medical calls and walk up streets in about 3 feet of snow, 2 feet of snow, carrying full gear, emergency bags because their vehicles could not make it through, and DPW had not yet been able to clear side roads. And along with that came loss of power, which saw an increase in those calls that came into the city. Thankfully, as mentioned before, it would only took a few days for power to be restored in the city of Hartford, but other areas were not as lucky as the city was. And in turn, since the city was up and running before most other parts were, this allowed for Hartford to provide some mutual aid to other communities that were still lacking a little bit and had to catch up. Also, when Winter Storm Alfred, since it was so severe, a lot of community services were suspended, and some people that benefit from those, such as the special needs population, did not receive the care that they needed, were not able to get treatment from their nurses that come to visit them at home. Social workers were, in a sense, limited as to what they can do. And these are all things that were identified as major hazards, since these are things that go on in the day-to-day life, and when you take those away for even a day or two or a week, it could pose major problems and result in fatalities. Property loss was a major thing, damage to property and loss of property, as a lot of trees fell down on homes, vehicles, and as a result, the city did have to respond to that. And along with that, care for the homeless population. As I mentioned earlier, the police department has the additional responsibility of, since then, they have the additional responsibility now of transporting people from the homeless population or people from the special needs population who can't get to a warming shelter. They transport them to a warming shelter, which results in the supplemental of police officers during winter storms, since you will have officers going offline transporting people while there'll still be calls coming in for service. Now, with that resources and capabilities, the Hartford Police Department has 450 sworn personnel and at least 315 vehicles. Of course, during a winter storm, those numbers are supplemented a little bit more to their normal duty shifts to be able to compensate for responding for calls for service, as well as assisting people and transporting them to emergency shelters or helping people that are stuck in the road with their vehicles. Fire has about approximately 350 personnel. They have a total of they have 12 houses, they have 11 engines, 5 ladder trucks, 1 tactical rescue vehicle, 2 district chiefs, 1 for the north end, 1 for the south end, and 7 backup apparatuses in case one of their trucks, one of their engines or ladders goes out of service. With that as well, it has been discussed too, in such an emergency such as a severe winter storm like Alfred or one of similar nature, it'd be recommended to have snow plows and equipment outfitted to the fire trucks themselves to be able to respond in the event that DPW can't clear a side road, or a DPW truck can't be dispatched rapidly enough to clear a road prior to a fire engine's arrival. So the city is looking into obtaining plows for at least houses that contain 2 trucks, an engine, and a ladder, to one of those vehicles to have a plow attached to it, or if that seems to be too costly, which is still being worked out in the budget, having a DPW truck detailed to each firehouse and responding with the fire truck, in a sense leading the way for fire to get to the call as they clear the road for them ahead of it. Now, DPW has about 315 personnel in their department. They have about 415 vehicles, and about 189 of those are designated snow removal vehicles. And of those vehicles, as mentioned, they would be the majority. DPW, like the fire department, like the police department, would also have a supplement in personnel to respond for that, as there was always a potential for trucks going down. Therefore, DPW would need to be ready to take a truck offline and get a new one going, or repair that truck as rapidly as possible and try and get it back online and back on the road clearing snow. Also, there is an emergency operations center located at the Public Safety Complex at 253 High Street in Hartford, which houses both the police department and the fire department's headquarters. And from there, both agencies work together in establishing emergency operations for the city when the mayor activates the emergency operations plan, as well as declares a state of emergency within the city. From there, they can agree on the blue parking ban lights that are located around the city to notify people to move their vehicles if possible off the road and into their driveways or into designated parking lots, usually provided courtesy of Hartford Public Schools. And with this also is where mutual aid agreements are discussed. Now, for the most part, the city of Hartford would like to be able to handle snow removal operations on their own with as little help as possible. As we've seen during Winter Storm Alfred, every town was suffering, and mutual aid was very difficult to obtain from neighboring municipalities because of how heavy impact all the communities were. For the most part, it's like mutual aid agreements are a backup, and they are in place to have mutual aid from the city of the town of Bloomfield, town of West Hartford, Weathersfield, and even East Hartford if necessary, as well as Newington. Now, along with that, there are city contractors. As DPW becomes overwhelmed, there are at least 6 city contractors that the city has been in talks with and has previously used to clear out smaller lots, smaller buildings, smaller municipal areas, so that DPW can be dedicated fully to the public roads. And the City of Hartford also is able to communicate to its residents through its integrated public alert warning system. So it can reach out to the public through their cell phones, through print and news media, TV, online, radio. And along with that, as mentioned earlier, there are 2 warming shelters, and a 3rd is available if those first 2 become overwhelmed, and even more if needed. Now, currently the budget is still intact for this year, as there has not been a lot of snowfall this year. Other years, though, of course, we have seen years where there has been heavy snowfall week after week, or heavy snowfall every other day, and the budget has been exhausted. Now, that is something that we do plan for, and unfortunately, when that does happen, the budget does run out, and we find ourselves in a tight situation. Now, a major concern with the budget would be that major snowfall could exhaust the budget prematurely in future years. Therefore, if last-minute needs for resources comes up, they may not be able to be met right away, which is why the city needs to work with what it has right now and be able to work with that and keep minimal what additional resources they may need during the response for an incident such as this. Now, the budget is handled by the Director of Budget Management Services, Revenue and Grants Manager for the City of Hartford, and pretty much they account for the cost of pre-treatment for the roads prior to snowfall, snow removal during and after the snowfall, overtime for DPW, police, fire, as well as any other city officials that are directly involved in this, and resource acquisition if necessary, as well as contracts if necessary to supplement. Now, some of the concerns with implementing this to the plan would be overall just costs associated with it. The whole plan is to keep costs minimal and attain everything needed prior to snowfall, prior to the winter, so that way if there is anything else that is needed during winter or during heavy snowfall season, it is not an issue as it's been taken care of beforehand. Now, with this plan, it would be implemented immediately into the city upon approval from the mayor and the city council. With that, this plan would be briefed to the mayor and to the city council, as well as department directors and assistant directors in regards to getting it in motion, getting it well known throughout the entire city and the different agencies. With that, the plan is to brief the mayor and city council, as they are stakeholders and do need to know. And then directors such as director of DPW, police chief, fire chief, health and human services, would be get the directors and assistant directors involved in that, get them aware and familiarized with